Hey everybody, it is good to see you. Dr. Chris McElmurray here, pastor of First Baptist Church Harrelson, and this is our Wednesday night Bible study, Kingdom Vision. I'm trying to get the right angle here. Oh my goodness, there we go. Hello, it is good to see everyone. I hope everyone is doing okay, and be sure to like and comment. Let us know that you're here. And tonight we're going to be looking at Daniel chapter 3. This is a strong reaction of the three Hebrew children of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, although in this chapter that's their Babylonian names instead of their Hebrew names of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Um, and so we're going to be looking in Daniel chapter 3 where the king's dream goes to his head. The dream that he had in chapter 2 seems to be a connection here because he was told that he was so great, Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, you, O king, you're the head of gold. And so as a result, he says, well, let's fill out that whole image then. Let's make a gold image. And so in chapter 3, we're going to see the story of Nebuchadnezzar and his golden image that he sets up on the plain of Dura, and the three Hebrew children, the three friends, some people call them. But as a background to this, I want you to understand the Hebrew, or the Israelite, uh, the Jewish take from the prophecy of Isaiah. In Isaiah chapter 44, we hear their satire of idolatry. Listen to this very cutting prophecy from Isaiah. The man shapes iron into a cutting tool and does his work over the coals, fashioning it with hammers and working it with his strong arm. He also gets hungry and his strength falls or fails. He drinks no water and becomes weary. Another shapes wood. He extends a measuring line. He outlines it with red chalk. He works it with planes and outlines it with a compass and makes it like the form of a man, like the beauty of man, so that it may sit in a house. Surely he cuts cedars for himself and takes a cypress or an oak and raises it for himself among the trees of the forest. He plants a fir and the rain makes it grow. Then it becomes something for a man to burn. So he takes one of them and warms himself. He also makes a fire to bake bread. He also makes a god and worships it. He makes it a graven image and falls down before it. Half of it he burns in the fire. Over this half he eats meat as he roasts a roast and is satisfied. He also warms himself and says, Aha, I am warm, I have seen the fire. But the rest of it he makes into a god, his graven image. He falls down before it and worships. He also prays to it and says, Deliver me, for you are my God. They do not know, nor do they understand. For he, speaking of the true God, has smeared over their eyes so that they cannot see, and their hearts so that they cannot comprehend. No one recalls, nor is there knowledge or understanding to say, I have burned half of it in the fire, and also have baked bread over its coals. I roast meat and eat it. Then I make the rest of it into an abomination. I fall down before a block of wood. He feeds on ashes. A deceived heart has turned him aside, and he cannot deliver himself, nor say, Is there not a lie in my right hand? Isaiah 44, verses 12 through 20. Now, with that said, I want you to think about one of the statements about idolatry and why there was such a strong reaction against this among those who were God's covenant people who were observing faithfulness to the Lord. The first commandment is love the Lord your God with your whole heart, with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. The first commandment of the Ten Commandments is no idols, okay? No graven images. So here's the deal. No other God before me. Uh, that's kind of lumped in there with that. Um, no other God before me. God's an only God kind of God. No idolatry. Uh, this is a type of religion they called aniconic. It is without icons. So worshiping without idols, worshiping without statues and images. because God is about reality. The one true God, the real God, has already created his image in Genesis chapter 1. He's already installed his image in the temple of creation on day 6 of its dedication. And that Tselem, that image, which is often used as of a graven image or an idol, this is something that God says, I've already made an image of flesh and blood, of flesh and bone, not something to be made of metal or wood or stone. Once heard a preacher say about this, I will never forget it. A God that you can carry around can't carry you. A God that you can pick up and carry around. A lot of these gods were household gods. The teraphim, you'd see them in the little alcove of someone's home there in the ancient Near East. They were used sometimes as the goods to show that you had the right to inheritance if you had the household gods. You see that from some of the stories of the patriarchs, especially Jacob and his uncle Laban. But this is going to be idolatry on a grand scale. So let's see what's going on in Daniel chapter 3 here. The genre here is a court story, but it's the type that is a conflict story. There are conspirators, people conspiring against those who were righteous, the protagonists, the heroes of the story. And so we're going to see that this also parallels Daniel's court conflict in Daniel 6 with the lion's den. There's actually quite a few contours of the story that are the same. But so many of these matters that we've seen, whether it be the matter of Daniel refusing the king's meats, the matter of Daniel interpreting the king's dream, and now this is the matter of Daniel's 3 friends resisting worshiping this image. All of these matters in exile that Israel is facing, that Judah is facing, the seed of the kingdom, the sons of Jewish nobility. These are life and death matters in every single instance. This is a matter of life or death. And so the message so far in Daniel is, in exile you'll be tested regarding your identity, regarding your integrity, your ways, regarding your insight, your wisdom, your worldview, as we saw in Daniel chapter 2, and now with regard to idolatry. And so let's read the very first section here in verses 1 through 7, the king's cult. Daniel chapter 3, verses 1 through 7, the king's cult. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, the height of which was 60 cubits, and its width 6 cubits. This is 90 feet by 9 feet. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent word to assemble the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all the rulers of the provinces were assembled for the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Nebuchadnezzar set up an image. Nebuchadnezzar set up an image. Nebuchadnezzar set up, image, image, image. And then you have that list of all the government officials. Everybody who's anybody is there because the king is doing something. He is setting up this image, and you better be there because he's dedicating it. All right? So it says in verse 4, then the herald loudly proclaimed, to you the command is given, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. Ooh, that sounds familiar. That at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. Therefore at that time, when all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. All right, very compact, these verses here. The what is that there is a gold colossus. This is an image. It's not specific whether this is an image of Nebuchadnezzar himself or a god. In either case, it is nevertheless idolatry. When we say colossus, we have large images, large statues during this time. Not long after this, in the Persian period, over in Greece, you have the Colossus of Rhodes, which is the most famous statue of antiquity. It was a little bit taller than this image. This was 105 feet high. Was the Colossus of Rhodes. This is 90 feet tall by 9 feet wide. The where is the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So this is in the capital city's province. They were assembled for an image dedication, and this was an occasion to reaffirm loyalty to the king. The herald's proclamation highlights peoples, nations, and languages. You have all the instrumentation. You have worship of the image, and the idea is worship or else. We find that the or else is you will be put in you will suffer death by burning in the furnace of blazing fire. So death by burning was occasional in the ancient Near East. You do see it show up. As far as connections with the furnace there, some scholars have suggested that the furnace was the one for making the image and melting and casting the metal for it. That's an interesting proposal. It's hard to see any hard evidence for that, but it is an interesting idea. If you don't give homage to the image, ooh, I like that, then you will be consumed by the very thing that made the image, which was the furnace. There seems to be a slight connection to Revelation when we look at the beast from the land, the earth beast in Revelation 13, especially verses 14 and 15, where it talks about the beast and his image. And we find this beast and his image couplet throughout the rest of Revelation. We find it in chapters 14, 15, 16, 19, and 20. Anyway, so that's the first point here, is the king has set up a cult. This is the idea of imperial ideology, imperial worship, because the king is the one setting it up. He is acting as the high priest for this image, this god, whoever it may be. It could be a type of imperial cult where it is an image of the emperor. Okay, we see that that's going on in Revelation, to be sure. We know that was going on in the churches of Asia Minor. But in this situation with Babylon and Daniel, it's kind of left ambiguous as to what the image is. But it is definitely something where you will do this because this is state religion, and you will bow, you will offer worship. And for a lot of people, this was just, hey, it's Tuesday, that was normal for them. Add another god to the shelf. But not for the 3 Hebrew children, not for these faithful Israelites, the seed of the kingdom. There was something else I was going to say about that, but oh well, if it's important, it'll come back up. Probably had something to do with the imperial cult, state worship, idolatry. Anyway, let's look at verses 8 through 12. So we move from the king's cult to the seed of the kingdom is charged. You got some haters. Certain haters are going to charge the seed of the kingdom, the 3 Hebrew children. We read this in verses 8 through 12. So here we go. Let me check and see who we got. We got Wild Bill with us. Hey, brother, good to see you, man. All right, a little shout out there for Wild Bill. 8 through 12. Here we go. For this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans, I love the implication is certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. They responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music is to fall down and worship the golden image. Gold image. So this is about Babylon. Oh, I remember what I was going to say now. You ready? The people, the languages, the nations. Does this sound like the Tower of Babel? Babylon, all the way back in Genesis 10 and Genesis 11. And then that figure of Babylon, and people and nations and languages, you see that go forward into Revelation as well. So just something to think about. Very interesting. All right, back to where we're at. They're being charged by certain haters. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast in the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jews, certain Chaldeans are accusing certain Jews. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. So here is the court conflict story, that genre. We see, first of all, that it's certain Chaldeans versus certain Jews. The Chaldeans, if you recall, were the ones who were at risk in the previous chapter, in Daniel chapter 2. Daniel and his three friends, they showed themselves to be better, 10 times better than everybody else in Daniel chapter 1. Daniel saves their hides in chapter 2, but now they're trying to jockey for position and flatter the king. You hear them laying it on thick. They're buttering him up. But the issue here with the Jews, you see that issue of identity. Not their Hebrew names, but their Babylonian names are used here. And the charge is that they've disregarded the king. So this is an issue of state power. They're bucking your power. All right. They do not serve your gods. Listen to how they say this. Your gods, they don't serve them. So they disregard you. They don't serve your gods. And they don't worship the golden image which you have set up. So now we are in trouble. So we've talked about the king's cult, that he has created a cult as a following, a religious following. We've talked about the seat of the kingdom charged by certain people. Well, now we come to the king's confrontation in chapter 3, verses 13 through 18. I got to write this down. Homage to the image. That's catchy. I like that. All right. So the first thing that we see is the king's questioning. Let's look at this in verses 13 through 18. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and anger, gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up?" Now, he's going to act like, he's like, "Am I not merciful? Now, if you are ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music." They love that whole thing. There's all this fanfare, all this music. We got the band together. Why don't you just give us a little bow? Give us a little bow. Fall down and worship the image that I have made. Very well. I'm giving you a chance to do the right thing here. But if you do not worship, you will be immediately cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands? In verse 15, the very tail end of this, that question, what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands, is the theological question of this chapter. That's where the theology is at. That's the question that is going to be answered. What God is there who can deliver you out of my hands? Nebuchadnezzar, the head of gold, from Daniel's interpretation of my dream in the last chapter. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. And so, here's what we see. A chance to demonstrate allegiance. The parallel of the no one can deliver them out of his hands. We see that with the little horn. Excuse me. Oh, I'm about to sneeze there. My bad. Not necessarily the little horn. Actually, it's the middle horn in Daniel 8:7, not the one to be confused with the middle, with the little horn. And the middle horn is most likely, I would say, Alexander the Great in Daniel 8:7. But again, the parallel doesn't mean that we're talking about the exact same thing here. But the theological question, the issue is the same. This is the idea of the pride and the arrogance of imperial ideology. And what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands? Just demonstrate your allegiance through idolatry. Just do it. Okay? Just bow the knee. Just kiss the ring. Just offer the incense. Just offer the sacrifice. Just say the words. Just make the confession. The three friends answer. We do not need to answer, which is ironic. They answer his question. Our God is able to deliver us from blazing fire and from your hand. What basis do they have for this? How do you know, three Hebrew children? How do you know God can do this? Oh, that's right, because the God of Jewish exiles in Babylon is the same God who delivered Israelite slaves from Egypt. Even if he doesn't, we will still not serve your gods or worship your image. You have an example of faithful witness. Some of y'all know I've done my dissertation on Revelation, and I had a professor by the name of Gerald Stevens. He's a wonderful man, excellent scholar, and he's a great teacher. And he had a practice that he would give to us. He said, whenever you do a book review or whatever you're doing, if you can begin to just sum up things in 2 words, find the 2 words that capture the essence. And that will help you begin to unify and wrap your thinking around what it is you're studying. And so oftentimes I've done that. I try to do that as I study biblical books, like with Daniel. I say it's about kingdom vision. With Revelation, I would say it's about faithful witness. And so the reason Daniel resonates in so many ways with Revelation isn't just because there seems to be some call-outs that Revelation seems conscious of Daniel. Make no mistake, Revelation is not just Daniel 2.0. It's not the Daniel of the New Testament. It's more than that. But it does lean very heavily on some things. But one of the things that we see coming out is this idea that's illustrated in this story. The way you sum up Revelation in 2 words is faithful witness. It's the first descriptor of Christ. You see faithful witness is the way that you conquer throughout the book of Revelation. We're called to be faithful witnesses. It's one of the most elegant ways of wrapping up what that message, what it was about. And so now we have to find out what's going to happen to them. So we've seen the king's cult. We've seen the accusers, the seat of the kingdom charge, the king's confrontation. But now we see the king's consequences in verses 19 through 27. Let's read here. Then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath, and his facial expression was altered toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Literally, we're going to talk about what that means in a minute. There's a kind of a pun here. It's funny. He answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was usually heated. He commanded certain valiant warriors who were in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to cast them into the furnace of blazing fire. Then these men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and their other clothes, and were cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. For this reason, because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace had been made extremely hot, the flame of the fire slew those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire, still tied up. And that is through verse 23. Now let's look at what happens in verses 24 through 27. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astounded and stood up in haste. He said to his high officials, Was it not 3 men we cast, bound into the midst of the fire? They replied to the king, Certainly, O king. He said, Look, I see 4 men loosed and walking about in the midst of the fire without harm, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the furnace of blazing fire. He responded and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out, you servants of the Most High God, and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the midst of the fire. The satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's high officials gathered around and saw in regard to these men that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men, nor was the hair of their heads singed, nor were their trousers damaged, nor had the smell of fire even come upon them. And so what we see here is a couple of things. First of all, in verse 19, we find a couple of things. When it says that his facial expression was altered toward them, it literally says the image of his face changed. The image, Salim, like the image that he's asking everybody. So it's almost like when his face changes like that, it's like, oh, we recognize that guy. That's the guy we were supposed to be bowing down to on the plain of Dura. All right, so his image changed. It's like, you mad, bro? You mad? Okay. The focus on the command issued and the subsequent wrath here, it leads us to think about this connection to Cain. What was the original thing where everything got out of hand? Was Cain killing his brother, and you see him confronted by God, and it says that he's angry, and then his countenance fell. And so it seems that something's going on here like that with Nebuchadnezzar. And then after that, we find that there's a 7-fold association with Cain and a 7-fold increase of consequences there. So here Nebuchadnezzar has a 7-fold increase. Not really sure what all the connection is, if it's just some kind of template or a type or whatever. It's interesting to think about and play with there. But there's also who the command consumes. It doesn't consume Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It consumes certain warriors who are at the command of Nebuchadnezzar. These are his most valiant. These are the people who are obedient to him. And so as a result, we see a contrast between the meaningfulness of the 3 friends' impending death with the meaninglessness of the death of certain soldiers who were obedient to the king. What does that get you, being obedient? Here's what it gets you, being obedient to the king. You get consumed by the fire in the place of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So there's a switching of places there. Here in these verses we find Tremper Longman. He's one of my favorite Old Testament scholars. He says that the overarching theme of the book is that in spite of appearances, God is in control. The idea is that God is in control. He is sovereign. He is king, no matter who's the gold head, no matter who's at the top. And we see that whole thing's coming down. We also see something else. This 4th friend, like a son of the gods. Now, some people are very eager to press this toward Jesus and to say this is talking about Jesus, a pre-incarnate Son of God. We know that this is an angel, according to verse 28. We'll read that in a little bit. But the fact that they're loose, they're walking about in the midst of the fire without harm, God has sent his angel. And you have his children, his people, alive, and they are in the fire, but they are not consumed. This is another image that we've seen before of slaves in a different empire, not Babylon, but Egypt, who were brought out into the burning desert. And the symbol that was given to their deliverer was a burning bush, a bush that was on fire, yet it was not consumed. That greenery, that life there, those leaves, it represents life in the midst of severe fiery trial, fiery testing. And so you have this burning bush motif. God preserves his remnant through fire. And what we see, and this is the theology of the passage here, is not only that uh, he saved them in the fire, not from the fire, because they had to go through the fire to be tested and found faithful. I want to say that again. He saved them in the fire, not from the fire, because they had to go through the fire to be tested and shown and demonstrated to be faithful. The king comes near to tell the three friends to come out. There's a lot of come out, calling them the servants of the Most High God. This is the theology of the passage. What God is able to deliver you from my hand? This God. Why? How can you tell? And Nebuchadnezzar has to come to the conclusion he is the Most High God. This statement that he is the Most High God on the king's lips is very significant. The only effect the fire had on them was not on their clothing, not on the hair of their head, not on their bodies. They didn't even smell of fire. The only effect it had was to burn away their bonds, to loose them and set them free. And so now we see in the remaining verses the king's new command. We saw the king's consequences, but now we see the king's new command. And this is down in verses 28 through 30. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who put their trust in him, violating the king's command, and yielded up their bodies so as not to serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or tongue," you have that people, nation, or tongue thing here, "that speaks anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses reduced to a rubbish heap, inasmuch as there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way." Then the king caused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to prosper in the province of Babylon. The limb from limb calls back to the threat against all the different courtiers in the previous chapter. And so these were the people who brought the charge against them. So they have to shut it. They can't speak a word against them or their God. And so they become exemplars. There's a blessing. Blessed be the God. He blesses this God. This is a beatitude, what we call a macarism, from the Greek makarios, which is blessed. This contains the point of the story, especially with regard to yielding up your own body to the flames rather than succumbing to idolatry. The irony here of protection is, what does it say? Also compared to able to deliver. All ironic according to Daniel 2. The protection and the prosperity there, this is also compared to Daniel 2. That's what I meant to say. Okay. He is able to deliver. So this is the theological message to the exiles and to those after the exile, is this God is able to deliver. Now some people say, where's Daniel? Did Daniel fall down and worship the God? It seems that in Daniel 2:49 at the end of the previous chapter that there's a statement there, and the statement, it says, "And Daniel made request of the king, and he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the administration of the province of Babylon while Daniel was at the king's court." The idea is that Daniel is supposed to stay there, and so maybe that's why they include it that way. What God is able to deliver you from my hand? Our God is able to deliver. Next thing you know, Nebuchadnezzar says, "The Most High God," and then he says, "Blessed be the God." That's the theology of the passage if you trace this in Daniel chapter 3. But it also tells you about, I see Wild Bill's statements, "Can't burn God's children, praise the Lord, our God is awesome." Yes, sir. Here's the deal, y'all. The world is going to try and press you into its mold. It's going to try and force you to worship its nonsense, its idolatry, its false reality, to take on its worldview, to demonstrate allegiance to its values. And these are things that um, we have to understand, that we can't negotiate the non-negotiables when it comes to idolatry and immorality and injustice. We are God's people. We follow His ways, and so we worship the one true God. We follow His ways. We hold His worldview revealed through His scriptures, and we try to live out His ways in justice and in righteousness. And so this has special application for New Testament believers, because a lot of these same themes gets brought back into play in the book of Revelation. This is about faithful witness. These three Hebrew children were what we call exemplars. They were paradigms to be followed. So I once heard somebody talking about preaching. He said, you shouldn't preach any be like these character sermons from the Bible. But if you study this stuff long enough, you're like, that's exactly what the author's going for here. Be like them, because God vindicates them in the end. They said, even if God doesn't save us, we still will not bow down and worship your idol. We're not going to serve your gods, and we're not going to worship the image that you've set up. And so, good word for us tonight. I hope things are going well for you. And I pray that the Lord blesses you this week. Stay strong, stay allegiant to the one true God and His Savior. So we serve the one who gave us the gospel of the kingdom of God in Jesus Christ. And so I will see you same bat time, same bat channel next week. Dr. Chris McElmurray, pastor of First Baptist Church of Harrelson, Georgia, signing off for the night. Bye, y'all. God bless you.